Emotional Sensitivity in Aging and VPT Method, number 1499, VPT Sharp 060, January 10, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation Category, Humanity, Aging, Cognition, Neuropsychology and Neuro-biophysics. Preface. Over the past 2 days, I wrote 2 papers on the diabetes hemoglobin A1C gap. Today, I moved into a new subject: emotional softening and emotional change with aging. On the surface, this shift may appear random or disconnected, as if my thinking lacks continuity. In reality, it is not. These topics are linked through physiology and psychology, within the same systems medicine framework. In my diabetes research, the gap between CGM-derived A1C and laboratory-tested A1C revealed how time, spikes, and variability create real physiological damage that a single, averaged number, such as a quarterly lab-tested hemoglobin A1C, cannot capture. Most clinicians still treat hemoglobin A1C as the golden standard, without realizing that it is only a snapshot. It hides dynamics, timing, and accumulated stress. To me, glucose is not a static biomarker, it is a flow, a movie, a trajectory, and an energy map unfolding over time. This perspective allowed me to explain why my CGM A1C was higher than lab A1C before 2021, and why the relationship reversed after 2021. In this emotional sensitivity study, the defined output strain follows the same structural pattern. Years of charitable giving, repeated, life-threatening events, accumulated living health experience, and declining physical reserve slowly load the system. Over time, emotional defenses loosen, and the response to the same stimulus changes. When I wrote an article about Japanese prisoners of war in Siberia, my tears fell. What appeared to be a sudden emotional shift was not sudden at all. It was the result of long-term loading from sustained giving, health challenges, and accumulated physical and emotional burden. This is not a jump from diabetes pathology to emotional psychology. It is the same structural framework applied to 2 subjects that look different on the surface, but are deeply interconnected through the same methodology. Both glucose regulation and emotional response are time-dependent fluid flows. Both rely on buffering capacity under stress. Both undergo state changes when thresholds are crossed. Both show nonlinear acceleration later in life. This is how my mind works. I do not collect research topics. I follow a framework and apply it wherever the system is honest enough to reveal its hidden behavior. This is not scattered thinking. It is continuity grounded in the same academic principles. Background. My research target is the human biomedical system, including both pathophysiological and psychological states. This is one of the most complex systems in existence. Biomedical systems are nonlinear, dynamic, time-dependent, and viscoplastic by nature. This is not a metaphor, it is a physical description. The human body consists of solid structures, soft matter, fluids, membranes, genetic material, cells, tissues, organs, and layered adaptive control systems. These systems consume and dissipate energy. They deform, recover partially, accumulate damage, retain memory, adapt, and eventually fail. Time and history are not external variables. They are intrinsic properties of the system. Elastic and linear models appear to work only within narrow limits. Short time spans, small perturbations, near baseline conditions, and before damage accumulation. These models are useful for teaching and limited local observations. But they are approximations, not truths. I studied elasticity at age 18 in Taiwan and plasticity at age 25 at MIT. At the time, without real-world working experiences, these subjects felt academic. Later, I realized that elasticity is valid only within a small domain. Many engineered structures rely on elastic design, often at the cost of over-design and material waste. Using elastic thinking to explain chronic disease is like using Hooke's law to explain metal fatigue after 30 years. It may describe a snapshot, but it misses the failure mechanism, which is inherently time-dependent and path-dependent. Statistics became dominant in medical research and clinical practice, largely because it does not require a constitutive model. A constitutive model defines how a system responds internally. When it is loaded over time, it explains how stress, flow, and damage are generated. It links cause and effect. It captures memory and irreversibility. Statistics replaces causality with correlation. It averages away history and trajectory. It treats variability as noise rather than as a signal of deeper truth. It smooths out spikes and outliers. In medicine, those outliers are mortalities. This made statistics attractive for complex biomedical systems, but the cost has been high. In medicine, we are dealing with human lives. A real life should not be treated as a data point. Statistics can describe what usually happens, but it cannot explain why damage accumulates, when failure occurs, or how close a system is to irreversible breakdown. Fields such as aerospace, artificial intelligence, and semiconductor engineering advanced faster than medicine, because failure is immediate, visible, and non-negotiable. Bridges collapse, turbine blades creep, transistors overheat, computers stop functioning, spacecraft fail. Engineers therefore had no choice but to model nonlinearity, plasticity, time dependence, fatigue, creep, energy absorption, dissipation, accumulation, and structure irreversibility. Medicine, by contrast, has often hidden failure behind population averages, correlations, delayed outcomes, and statistical smoothing. Diseases may take 10 or 20 years to manifest. Feedback loops are weak. As a result, oversimplified biomedical models survived, but failed to expose some real insights. The irony is clear. The human body is far more complex than a jet engine, yet it has often been described using much simpler mathematics, frequently, without physics-based grounding. This is not because the body is simpler, but because medicine historically lacked the tools, language, and willingness to model irreversible dynamics. In December 2020, my MIT mentor, Professor Norman Jones, suggested that I try viscoplasticity in my medical research. Since then, I have produced nearly 900 medical research papers. Viscoplastic thinking fits biomedicine naturally. It captures slow energy accumulation, threshold behavior, sudden failure after long quiet periods, partial recovery, change rate effects, and damage memory. This is exactly how diabetes, vascular disease, kidney failure, cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration, cancer risk, stroke, and aging behave. Chronic conditions are not states, they are trajectories. Mortality diseases are not statistics, they are lives lost. Methodology and conceptual framework. This study applies the VPT model, Viscoplastopology, to investigate emotional sensitivity during aging. VPT integrates two core components. The viscoplastic component models time-dependent, irreversible strain, accumulation and energy dissipation. It explains why a system can appear stable for years, and then change abruptly once thresholds are crossed. The topological component examines geometric structure, data continuity and connectivity, and trajectory evolution over time. Health and disease are not treated as categories or labels, but as paths within a coupled stress-strain energy landscape. Human physiology is neither purely solid nor purely fluid. It is always both. Disease progression is best described using fluid dynamics, while end-stage outcomes are best explained using solid dynamics. Accordingly, this study explicitly distinguishes between solid VMT and fluid VMT, while integrating them within a unified framework. During numerical calculation, the same governing equations and software tool were applied to both states. Solid VMT applies to load-bearing structures such as vessel walls, myocardium, connective tissue, bone, cartilage, and extracellular matrix. In these systems, strain accumulates slowly and damage appears as stiffening, calcification, fibrosis, and loss of compliance. Deformation is largely irreversible. Fluid VMT applies to flow-dominated systems such as blood circulation, glucose transport, lipid transport, hormone signaling, and neural transmission. These systems are governed by change rate effects, amplitude spikes, oscillation frequencies, and transient overloads. Damage arises not from averages, but from repeated excursions and instability. Solid and fluid VMT are tightly coupled. Fluid spikes impose stress on solid structures, while structural stiffening amplifies flow instability. Elevated glucose flow damages vascular walls. Vascular stiffening magnifies pressure waves, and pressure spikes accelerate micro-rupture. This coupling effect explains why chronic diseases progress silently and then fail suddenly and catastrophically. Averaged biomarkers fail because they erase spikes, hide change rate effects, and underestimate energy transfer into solid structures. By the time solid damage becomes visible, irreversible thresholds have already been crossed. This mechanism was demonstrated in my analysis of the hemoglobin A1C gap, which traditional clinical interpretations failed to explain over many years of clinic consultations and academic correspondence. Within VPT, emotional sensitivity is treated as a time-integrated strain response to prolonged biomedical loading over 40 years. It is not a personality trait and not pathology. It is a trajectory shaped by accumulated charity giving, declining bodily reserve, and life-threatening events, linking both physiology and psychology within the same human system. Statistics did not fail because it is wrong. It failed because it was asked to do the work of physics. Biomedical complexity has exceeded what statistics alone can explain, just as economics and financial markets encountered similar statistical limits. Once biomedical systems are recognized as coupled fluid-solid, history-dependent, energy-dissipating systems, VPT becomes the minimal language required to describe reality without distortion. This framework forms the methodological foundation of this study. Data structure and variables of this study. This particular study uses a longitudinal, self-observed data set spanning 8 life periods, T0 through T7. Each period covers approximately 5 years, together representing the last 40 years of my life. These 8 periods integrate physical condition, psychological load, an emotional response into a continuous profile. The data set is intentionally compact, prioritizing structural clarity over statistical density. One output variable and 3 input variables are defined for each period. Output variable, empathy, strain. Empathy represents emotional sensitivity and resonance with the suffering of others. It is treated as the system strain and scaled from 0 to 100. Lower values reflect emotional protection common during high-pressure career or survival stages. Higher values reflect emotional softening and increased resonance that often emerge with aging and accumulated life experiences. Values were assigned using a consistent rubric across all periods. Input variable 1, charity, stress 1. Charity represents sustained human burden rather than financial contribution. It reflects responsibility, emotional engagement, time and financial commitment, and long-term obligation. It is normalized from 0 to 1. High values correspond to large-scale scholarship programs or emotionally intensive caregiving, where emotional density matters more than monetary scale. Input variable 2, health, stress 2. Health represents chronic pathophysiological stress rather than biological age. It is normalized from 0 to 1. Lower values indicate reduced metabolic and cardiovascular load due to sustained lifestyle management. Declining health stress does not imply reversal of aging, but successful stress unloading over time. Input variable 3, threats, stress 3. Threats represent peak life-threatening exposure, both emotional and physical, within each period. It captures severity rather than frequency. Equal values indicate comparable mortality risk, whether arising from multiple events or a single catastrophic episode. Threats function as peak stress injectors, analogous to rupture-level loads in physical systems. VMT analysis results. Applying VMT to this 40-year dataset reveals mechanisms that static, model or correlation-based methods cannot capture. Empathy strain increases from 10 to 95 over time, reflecting emotional development, strengthening, and eventual softening. This increase is nonlinear. The most rapid rise occurs between T1 and T2, indicating my high-tech business success and a large-scale charitable program satisfaction. The highest strain rate. In viscoplastic systems, strain rate, not magnitude alone, governs irreversible energy accumulation. Stress convergence peaks at strain levels between 85 and 90, figuring T5-T6, from 2011 to 2020. This range represents maximum system loading rather than structural failure. The system remains stable, reflecting an adaptive response rather than breakdown, driven by health improvement, the absence of imminent mortality disease threats, and smaller but more focused charitable activities. In summary, my VMT energy contribution ratios. Charity contributes approximately 45% of total VMT energy and acts as the dominant long-term stressor. Health contributes about 24% and shows modifiability through behavior. Threats contribute about 31% and appear as sharp, localized peaks associated with his total of 9 life-threatening events. Time domain analysis identifies T2, from 1996 to 2000, as the dominant energy accumulation period. By the end of T2, 1995 of my high-tech business public offering, nearly 79% of lifetime VMT energy has already been accumulated. This dominance arises from the coincidence of high stress with the highest strain rate, demonstrating the central role of viscosity and time dependency. The area evolution plot shows a large spike at T2, from 1991 to 1995, followed by sharp unloading. Subsequent periods, my business retirement years, contribute additional energy at a much slower rate. The cumulative energy curve approaches saturation asymptotically, reaching 100% by T7. This pattern is characteristic of viscoplastic systems, where early high-rate loading dominates irreversible deformation. Emotional softening in later life is not weakness, it is an adaptive viscoplastic outcome. The system absorbs stress, dissipates energy, and responds with greater sensitivity rather than emotional shutdown. This reflects preserved humanity and conscious choice, not decline. Key VMT findings. Strain rate and time dependency dominate long-term outcomes. T2, from 91 to 95, accounts for the majority of my lifetime energy accumulation. Charity is the primary sustained stressor. 45% of VMT energy, health is modifiable, and threats act as acute energy injectors. My strain of emotional softening represents adaptive strength, rather than weakness. These results demonstrate the unique explanatory power of VPT model, in revealing mechanisms that conventional methods systematically miss. Topological data analysis TDA results. This particular study applies topological data analysis TDA model to the same longitudinal self-data set used in the VMT model analysis, spanning 8 5-year periods from T0 through T7. TDA is used here not as abstract mathematics, but as a geometric lens to examine geometric shape, data points continuity and connectivity, clustering, and trajectory evolution of emotional behavior within a multi-stress environment. The data form a four-dimensional space consisting of one output strain, empathy, and three input stressors, charity, health, and threats. Each time period represents a point in this space. Rather than analyzing pairwise correlations or average trends, TDA focuses on how these points are connected, how the trajectory bends, and where structural transitions occur. The most prominent topological feature is a clear trajectory elongation between T2 and T3. This segment represents the largest geometric displacement in the topological data space, driven by a rapid increase in empathy strain, from 20 in T2 to 60 in T3, combined with elevated charity and threat stress. This abrupt expansion confirms that T2-T3 is not merely a high-stress period, but a topological phase transition, where the system moves into a new geometric region. This finding aligns with the VMT result, identifying T2 as the dominant strain rate and energy accumulation period. From T2 through T4, the trajectory shows partial contraction and curvature rather than reversal. Stress values decline, but the system does not return to its earlier geometric neighborhood. This indicates topological memory. Once the system has crossed a deformation boundary, later, recovery follows a different path, consistent with irreversibility. Another notable feature is the separation of threats from the charity and health plane. In later periods, T5 to T7, threats exhibits a negative correlation with empathy overall, and its values cluster near zero during T3 through T6 before reappearing at T7. In TDA terms, this creates a branch-like structure rather than a smooth manifold. This branching reflects the episodic nature of life. Threatening events strike in T7, which inject localized distortion without defining the long-term trajectory. Charity and health, by contrast, remain topologically coupled to empathy across most periods, forming a smoother backbone of the trajectory. Their moderate positive correlations indicate sustained influence, rather than abrupt excursions. In late periods T5 through T7, the trajectory extends further along the empathy axis with reduced health and intermittent threats. This geometric pattern reflects emotional softening, with reduced physiological reserve and episodic existential stress, rather than structural instability. During T5 through T7, 2911 through 2025 my physical health improvement years. In summary, TDA reveals that emotional sensitivity evolves as a continuous but nonlinear trajectory, with clear phase transition, irreversibility, and branching behavior. These geometric features cannot be captured by statistical averages, but emerge naturally when the system is examined through its shape, continuity, and path history. Explanation of the TDA figures. The 3D scatter diagram shows the continuous trajectory of emotional evolution in strain-stress space, with empathy as the strain and charity and health as stress dimensions, ignoring threats. Each point represents a 5-year life period. The topological path is curved rather than clustered, demonstrating that emotional sensitivity evolves as a continuous, history-dependent process. The large geometric jump between T1 and T2 marks a phase transition driven by high strain rate, after which the trajectory bends, but does not return, confirming irreversibility and topological memory. The sequence of radar charts shows how the composition of stress changes over time. Early periods are dominated by threats, midlife is shaped primarily by sustained charity and rising health stress, and later periods show reduced physiological stress with intermittent existential threats. The changing radar shapes illustrate that emotional softening is not caused by a single factor, but by a shifting balance among stress components over time. Together, these figures visualize emotional development as a geometric trajectory, with evolving stress structure, rather than as isolated events or static traits. From both the viscoplastic energy and topological geometry viewpoints, the conclusions are highly compatible. Time periods with high strain rates and high stresses produce elevated VMT energy, while the geometric structure becomes unstable, and data point connectivity is disrupted. Epilogue. After my recent stroke, over the past 6 months, I noticed that my heart is more easily touched by emotional stories. When I watch TV episodes or YouTube videos, especially those related to prisoners of war or orphans, at first, I wondered whether my emotional guard had softened into a weakness. After deeper analysis and self-reflection, I realized that this response is more complex. It is shaped by decades of humanitarian work, medical research, and accumulated understanding of both psychology and pathophysiology. This article was written under that realization. Through quantitative analysis supported by math-physical theory, I now understand myself more clearly and honestly. My increased emotional sensitivity is not a weakness, it is a sign of maturity, and a deeper connection to human suffering and humanity itself. This research began with an outward neuropsychological observations, and then moved inward to explore the underlying neuro-biophysical mechanisms. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only. and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.